Okay, so today we're talking about Redux. We learned about the Redux pattern or reducer pattern, which it talks about the reducer function and how it works. It talked about in general immutability, which is important for state management. I talked about how the reducer function has to be a pure function. It has to have two things. One would be the current state, and the other one would be action. The action, if you want to do an action, it has to work with dispatch, and dispatch will send two things, mostly one, but one is only must. The first one would be type, and then also if you want to change something, then that would be you have to add a payload. So we learned all that. We learned how actions are used to change the state within the reducer function. So the reducer, when you get into Redux, it's basically mostly just words and jargon. So when we say reducer, it's just a function that takes in two things and then gives you a predictable result all the time. So that's what the reducer is. It just basically takes two things and then gives you exactly what you ask for. So now we're moving on to Redux. Redux is a big topic. This is, I would say Redux is the hardest subject in state management, especially in React. React in general is mostly not the most complicated thing in the world. It is hard. React itself is hard. Components, props, and things like that, that's hard to understand. But when it comes to state management, then, originally state management was being like when React was first introduced, state management was a local thing. It was a component level, and Facebook itself, they realized that we cannot have a large application with hundreds of components at the same time use props and pass down state from like the parent component to all those hundreds of components. That would not be efficient. That would be very difficult. And also you will have a lot of errors and issues. So they realized they need to use something else to manage the state, especially for large applications. That's when they realized there was a need for using Redux. Redux is not part of a React, so there is a part of Redux that's within the React, but Redux is outside of React. So let's read our the introduction. React is very sophisticated UI component library that can be used together with a few other libraries to build out large-scale single-page application. But as our application's scale size is too, will the data we are concerned with within our application. And you can only start to imagine how difficult it might be to manage all the data inside the React components. Redux is a library that can help solve this problem by providing a single source of truth for our data within our application. As your team grows, as your application scales, Redux can help offset the pains that can be brought on as a result of the complexity. Okay, so at the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain what Redux is. You should be able to explain the problems it solves. You should be able to create a Redux store connected to the Redux application, React application. You should be able to use connect function to connect React components to the Redux store. You should be able to write actions and action creators to describe state changes. You should be able to write reducers to respond to the actions and update state. So these are the things that we will kind of tackle. Before we do all that, let's go to the Redux website. So Redux itself is actually its own framework. So Redux is a system that was built not for React. It was built for any JavaScript application. or any JavaScript framework, I should say. So these are the things that it will do basically. It will give us predictable state, centralized state. It will make our problems or state problems debuggable, and it's also flexible. You could use Redux with other systems if you like. And also Redux itself has its own systems that you could use. What does it mean to be predictable? Okay, so to be predictable, it means you are, whenever you click something, you're expecting that thing to happen exactly the same way every time. So that's the predictability. Also, when it comes to data is always very complicated. So if you have a data in your app, you're always moving data, you're always manipulating, you're always changing. You want to have something that takes care of your data. So Redux helps you write applications that behave consistently, run in different environments, and are easy to test. And then the centralized point of it is that you take all your data and you put it in one place. Centralizing your application's state and logic enables powerful capabilities like undo, redo, state persistent, and much more. So, for example, we usually have our state in, let's say, app.js. We want to move away from that and move our state to Redux. And basically, every time we want to do something with our state, we want to go to Redux and basically ask for our state or for our data. All right, so that's what Redux is. It's not a Java, it's not a React thing. It's just a library that was built to manage state. Redux is used for other JavaScript frameworks like Vue and other ones. So and also it came from another system called Flex that you do not want to learn. It's really very complicated. Redux is much easier than Flex. Flex is where the original state management system was, and then now Redux was created, and then Redux is much cleaner and easier to comprehend. And when I say easier to comprehend, that's relative because it's also a little bit complicated too. All right, so let's go back to here in our lesson. So let's kind of like look through the writing here. Managing application state and keeping it in sync across all layers of our application is very important. That's a fact. So you want to have every component to have, if it has the same state, you want all the states to be same. If you want to toggle something, you want all the components to know that you toggled something. You want to keep that in sync and all components to know about the changes. So let's say you have like a state in your app.js, and then you want to, let's actually do some drawing because I think it's much easier to draw things than to just talk about it. So usually you have like your app.js here. So this is where you have your state, right? This is where you have your state. So this would be state. So we have our state here. Now you will have a couple of other components that take from this. So mostly you will use props to pass down your state. So this would be props. This would be another component here. If you want to pass down those the state, then you will use props again to pass down to other smaller components to break things down. So this is the original way of like we were dealing with when we were dealing with the props. And then came the context API, which you guys learned. Context API is an easier way to wrap our state so that we can access it anywhere, right? So that will be sort of like a between we learned actually two things. We learned one would be component level. I wish I could just write somewhere here. I'm not sure if it lets me. Let me look for that. I'm new to this, so I don't think it will let me write. I don't see any pencil here. What is this? Okay, I don't want that. Stroke, text, no text. I don't see any text. Okay, that's fine. So component is C level, or component level would be props. Props would be component level state management. You could also say context API is also kind of like component level. So context. And then we need to move our state outside of all the components. So that would be global state management. So global, and that would be Redux, right? So Redux basically takes our state outside of all the components. So let's say this could be either maybe you will have a state here, and this would be context API. And let's say you pass something down here, this prop, you're using prop or context API. So that would be your life. So that's what we were doing before. Now comes Redux, and Redux will be just outside. So your state would be right here. So your state, you just moved it outside of all the components, not even in app.js. So if any component wants to get a state, or not only state, but also any change, it doesn't have to be state. It could be color change, anything. I mean, usually you use state to manage that, but any action too. When I say action, I mean any change to the state. Then you go to Redux. So this would be Redux. I'll just say R. So every time you want to get something, this component goes to Redux. This component goes to Redux. This one goes to Redux. So that's how they grab their stuff and they manage. And then Redux knows which component is connected to which and how it's connected. So it's basically like a centralized place for your components. So that's really important to understand that Redux is outside of all the components, and that's how you use it. Okay. So now we're moving away. Yeah, go ahead. If somebody wanted to talk.
Yeah, what's the difference between the context API and the Redux?
So the difference would be context API. You basically wrap your app.js, let's say, which we have the state, with a provider here. So your provider, and then now your state management is with this component. But now any component can access from this component, right? From this component. So I mean, context API, some people say it could be a centralized. I mean, you could put it outside if you like. You could put it in a different component. But at the end of the day, you have to wrap one component with the provider so that you could access the state. But then it becomes a decentralized so that any component can access. So this component will access from here. So it doesn't need any props to be passed down. So that would be context API. When it comes to Redux, it's outside. It has not connected to any of the components. It has something called store, which we will learn. And when it comes to Redux, mostly it's all about the jargon. It's all about the words. We will explain what every word means. We have store, producer, actions, all those stuff. We will explain each one of them one at a time, and I'll show you an example. It takes time to get used to Redux. It's one of those things that takes time. We learn, we passed like we did, like when we were doing JavaScript, we did what was it, callbacks or closures. Remember, you guys had a hard time with that. Redux is kind of like that. It's one of those things that you kind of have to copy the code and get the examples down, and then in the future, when you did a couple of examples, then you will learn how it works. So it's really hard to understand how everything's connected. I would just say copy the code first and then try to understand how things are connected. And also, it's good that you ask a question, Abdulrashid. It always helps to ask questions and try to clarify things. So Redux is outside. Context API is always has to be connected to a component, and then it becomes a decentralized so that you can access from anywhere, any component. So that is the difference. I mean, context API could be between component level or global level. So it could be between those two. So that's the difference. So now we understand like what the Redux does. What is the purpose of Redux is to basically take your state and put it outside of all your components. So you could just go and grab whatever you want from there. Instead of passing it through, instead of passing it through props or things like that, you don't need to do all that. So in here, introduction, it says Redux is predictable state management library for JavaScript applications and most popular state container for React application. Okay, so in here, they talked about how Facebook, so they said, we have noticed some complications around the area of state management. You may have asked you questions, which of our components should have states? Which of my components should just be a way to present some DOM elements? So originally when Facebook was creating React, they realized that you have to create a lot of components to do something. So you have to put together components. And the whole point of like React was to use components to compartmentalize, to put in compartments each thing you're doing. So if you have a, let's say you have some like store or like e-commerce website, you want to take your cart and you want to put it in one component. You want to take your anything related to transaction. You want to put it in one component. Forms will be another component. And then that component could break down into other components. As you guys have seen that when we were breaking things down, we always have like one component and then you break it down. So now with all these components that are breaking down, Facebook realized, oh, now if we want to manage the state, then that will be a problem because then you have to kind of pass things down. It will be a hassle. So here they said, Facebook team built a React first place, noticed that managing state could become a nightmare at a scale, and they only use component state. So they built a pattern and they said, everyone here at Facebook is going to write code after this pattern. This way, they could eliminate many of the problems unwillingly stateful. So they wrote down the Redux pattern. They didn't they didn't invent Redux, but they took the pattern of Redux, which they copied from Flux, which is a state management itself, but it's not a good state management. So you want to avoid Flux at all costs. So they copied how Flux kind of like manages things, and they simplified it and made it better. Okay. So what are the things that what are the components of basically Redux? So it would be better actually to kind of get an image. So let's say Redux here and go to images. Usually, I think this is one of the best images. There's also one that's animated right here. Yeah, there's one that's animated. But before we get to the animated one, Redux is a whole machine. So it works all together in one box, right? Redux contains a couple of things. The first thing that you have to get to know is the store. What is the store? Okay, yeah. So we need to know what is the store actually. So everything that changes within the application is represented by single JavaScript object known as the store. Think of the store as like a one place where any change that happens to your state, that's where you keep track. So the store is basically your state, right? Store is your state, and then you have something called reducer within the store. So reducer is a function, right? We learned a little bit about reducers. Reducer is a function that checks if the changes that happen to your state, basically. So if any change happens to your state, then the reducer function would be like, and don't worry about the word reducer. It's kind of like a advanced word, let's say. But the main thing is just a function that says, hey, okay, I think there is a change to the state. I think it would be better if we just draw something here. I'm not sure how to save all these drawings. Let me just save it as that, I guess. So let's start a new drawing. So I want to explain it in a simple format how the store works. So from this image, we see the store, and the store has the reducer, and then has something that's coming into, which is called dispatcher, and something that's going away from it, which is the state. And here we have the view. Think of a view as like your React components. So your normal React components, app.js, whatever components you have. And then think of actions as whatever happens here. If you toggle something, then that's action. So you send in an action to the store. And the way to get to the store is using dispatcher, okay? It's just, usually this is how it is. It's really hard to like comprehend the whole thing. But let's draw the store. So this is your big store. This is the store. Store is a huge object. I'm just gonna say like that. Object is a huge object with your state. Okay, is a huge object that contains your state. You're a copy of your state. Let's say the original copy of your state. So it contains your state. It's the whole store has your state. And now, if you want to change something from your state, you have to use, you have to send an action. So boom, you send an action to the store, right? So this would be an action. And this action could be a click of a button. So this would be like, let's say you click a button here, click. And this button, let's say you want to increment a number, let's say. So +1, you said. So when you click this button, you said +1. Now you need to change your state, right? You need to change your state and add 1. That would be an action. So an action will be sent. And for the store or your state to change, you need something called dispatch, which is a simple object. So this would be dispatch. We will learn, or dispatcher, people call it sometimes. We will learn. Dispatch is a simple object with information, with the information that's going to change. So you send an action, and then that action says, okay, I have something, send a dispatch to the store or your state, and then I have the changes that's going to happen. So this object is going to contain all the changes that's going to happen. And then the store has something called reducer. Reducer is a big object. This is another object. This is a function. Reducer is a function. And we talked about in our last lesson, the function that we talked about, which was the reducer pattern. So this will be a function, and this is a pure function. Pure function, okay? When I say pure function, it means it basically whatever you give it, it returns something that's predictable. So the reducer, this would be a reducer. Reducer takes whatever the dispatcher sends, right? And it says, okay, what do you want me to change? And then the reducer function says, okay, let's see what we can change. And the reducer does its job, boom, boom, boom. It does changes to the state. Of course, it has to copy the state. Remember, we talked about immutability. If you watched the last lesson, we talked about immutability. It means you do not ever change the state directly. You have to copy the state. And what copies the state is the reducer. It makes a copy of your current state, and it says, okay, now the dispatch sends us something to change. Now let's change something. But first, let's make a copy of our original state, and then let's make those changes, and then let's send out those changes. Okay. So this pure function has two things. One, state, of course, and this will be your current state. And this will be parameter. So the function parameters would be state. Two would be action. and that will be whatever you send out from this action. This action will get it and say, okay, now let's see if this is an object. Of course, it's an object because of the dispatcher makes it an object. And then the reducer will say, okay, I see some changes that need to happen. I need to copy this state, boom, boom, boom. And then I'm gonna make changes. This is my change, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, okay, now I made the change, go ahead. The reducer says, go ahead and change the UI. So, and we saw here our image, it sends out the state right here. So these little R's are like actions or anything that's going to change in this state, in the current state. So the reducer basically says, okay, I made the changes, now go send whatever the change happened. And the store says, okay, I think we're good. And I think we have everything we need. So now go ahead and change our UI. And what is the UI? Who can tell me what the UI is for in React? You guys remember?
The components.
Yeah, so this will be your components. So the React by itself, all React is UI. So when I say UI, it means just your basically just your like buttons, the text, the writings, that's your UI. So React basically changes this like automatically with no reload or anything. So now when the state changes, then your component re-renders, right? That's how the UI actually changes. Component re-renders, or we say sometimes component mounts, right? In when we're using class components. So your component re-renders and says, oh, okay, I see state change, boom, I'm gonna re-render, boom, then you see the changes. So that is kind of like how kind of like Redux works, is by starting from here, creating an action. Sometimes there might not be an action. So you might have just a simple thing, and then dispatcher has two things. I don't think I talked about the dispatcher. Dispatcher has two things. One, dispatcher has type. It needs to have a type. And this will be an object. So this will be Y. So a type. This is a must. So this is must. So you must have a type in dispatcher. Another one that's optional is something we call payload, but it's just the data. So, but in the industry, in React industry, we call it payload. And this would be just your data. So whatever you want to change, this would be data. And this data in this instant of like the incrementing, it would be 1. So your payload would be add 1. That would be your payload. And then the type will be a string. Usually type is always a string that indicates what needs to be changed. So this string will be sent to reducer, and reducer will say, okay, I see that string. Now let's do what the string is connected to. And we will learn how the reducer, all that stuff works. We'll see. Okay, that in big picture, that's Redux basically in big picture. Okay. We'll go in depth into how it works and all that. So let's go back to here. So we talked about that application state is immutable. So our state, the store, is immutable. You can never change the store directly ever. That is a something that if you do, then you're not doing Redux. You're basically kind of like doing your own thing. So when application state changes, we clone. So this is a something that is a key in Redux. So in here, when the application state changes, we clone the state object, modify the clone, not the original one, replace the original state with a new copy. So you take the old one, you put it somewhere, and then you get the new copy. We never mutate the original object. When we say object, we mean the state basically, and we never write our own store object. Okay, that's something that needs to be known. Pure functions change our state. Pure functions. What are pure functions? Who can tell me? We just talked about it a minute ago. In Redux, what is a pure function? we mentioned a little bit ago. In here, our drawing, which of these things is a pure function? Right here, we mentioned here pure function.
The state and action.
State and action, that is a part of it. So our pure function is reducer. Reducer is a function that is a pure function, right? And then it has two things, which is a state and action. So when I say pure function, I'm always talking about the reducer. Given the same input, a pure function returns the same output every time. All functions, right here it says reducer in Redux must be pure functions, meaning they take some state and description of what changes took place and returns a copy of our state. That's really important. Okay, so we talked about that. Now let's kind of go into examples of how to do this. And before we go, any question about like the bigger picture of what Redux is?
So Marlon, that statement right now you were talking about,
Yeah.
pure function, the user function is, they display the same thing. They don't change anything. Is that what does it mean?
When so pure functions, it means when you send something to reducers, which are just a pure function, just a normal function. And when I talk about pure function, I mentioned it last time a little bit. I can give you example of pure function. Let's go to REPL. Example of pure function. I think I can grab our last example. Where is it? Unnamed. I think it was this one 6 days ago. So this is what we did on our last lecture, and we talked about basically what they are. So these are some of the give this a second. Okay, so this is some of the things about pure functions. Number one is they do not let you reference outside. Okay, so now let's say you have this function. You have a function called something. It takes two parameters, and then it adds those two parameters. This is by itself is a pure function, right? So it only takes two things and it returns two things, and that's it. There's nothing else that's happening. This is a return. There's nothing else that's happening, right? But let's say that we also say here, we also say something like 1. We say here 1 is equal to 5, right? I remember we declared 1 here already. Now what's happening is we're grabbing something from outside. We're grabbing it from here and we're setting it here 5. Now this is not pure anymore, because now this function, you send the two things and now it might return you 3 things, right? So this is not pure function. Another thing is let's say you create a you call an API inside the function, pure function. So you say something like you create an Axios here, or fetch API, get you call your own blah blah, and then you say that get, then you called an outside API, right? Now the API might return something, it might not return something, we never know. Now this is not pure function anymore. But what is a pure function is you declare a function, you give it two things, it only returns those two things, right? Now if we say something here and we give it 2 and 5, right? It just adds those two numbers and it gives us back those two numbers, hopefully. So unless we get an error or something. Yeah, we got an error about the name thing, all this. So let's comment out all this. Okay, so run again. I don't know what this is. We did an example last time about the reducer. So now we give two things, it gave us 7. Now it doesn't matter what you give it. If a big number, you run it, it gives you exactly what you expected, right? Now another thing, you know, that's a pure function, right? So it doesn't mean it does not return something different. It's returning something different, but it's returning what you expected every time, right? It's not returning something else. So that's what we mean by pure function. Any other question? And we talked about immutability in depth in our last lecture. So inshallah, watch that one if you haven't. Okay, so let's move on to the examples today. So today we're going to our last application or last lesson, which we did a basic title here. You click it, you could update it, update, boom, it updates for you, right? So this is what we did last time. If you watched the last lecture, we moved our state, which is here, use state and all that. I'm not sure if you guys can see this fully. We moved our state to here, initial state, and then we created a basic reducer function, and we talked about how the reducer function works. Basically, you pass it two things, which we actually drew here, right here. You pass it two things, pure functions or reducer, state, action, right? Always state and action. You never give it anything else. State, action. Sometimes you give the state a initial state, or what, where it should start. What is the starting point for the state? And then you use switch statement to basically make sure all the actions are kind of recorded. So the first switch statement is toggle editing, right? And this is a string. So this string came from a dispatch. So in here, in our component, we have a button which is a dispatch here, and it has a toggle editing. Toggle editing is when I click this button, it toggles our editing feature, right? So that's all it does. It takes this editing state and it makes it true, right? So right here, this case, all it does is it returns an object with copying the state. We talked about last time, immutability. So this is what reducer does. It copies the state before it makes any changes to it, and then it takes whatever it wants to change and it changes. So in here, it's basically flipping the false to true and then to true to false, basically back and forth. We have another case, which is every time you see this big font or capitalized words, usually this is an action, right? This is the action. Remember that actions have two things. Who can remind me what two things actions usually have?
Type and payload.
Yep. So type and payload, we talked about it here. So actions send, type, and payload. And remember, the actions and dispatch, they work together to make changes to our state. So every time you see edit title or you see any of this is coming from the action and it's a type, right? So here we're saying in our switch statement, we're saying find the type that is either this or this, and then do whatever happens here, right? And then we have a default state, which is if you don't find any of them, then bring back the default state. So in here, this edit, we're editing the title. So when we click the title and we type something here and we update, that's what's happening here. We copy the current state, and then we take the title, which is right here. Originally is hello people. And then we say, okay, the data for that is action.payload. Where does action.payload come from? A dispatch always. So if you go down all the way, you see here, we have a dispatch. We have a type, edit title. It has to match with this one, 100%. If it's one word different, it will not work. And then the payload is whatever we write here. So whatever we write here is the payload. And that came from this input, right? This input gives us whatever we write here, and then we set that to here, right? And we have a state for this input right here. We have a state for that keeps record of whatever we type. Okay, so that is kind of like a going back to what we did last time, just showing you exactly what we did if you haven't watched the last lecture. So now we're going to move on and we're going to implement Redux, right? Okay, so let's save that. So the first step of implementing Redux, I'm not sure if I kind of document it here. Okay, so yeah, so here is going to give us kind of like a little bit of steps, let's say. So the first step is to install two things. One is React Redux. React Redux is a package that was created by React team to connect Redux to React, basically. So it's a bridge between the two Redux and React, okay? And Redux is also the library. So that's what we did already. I think, no, we didn't do it. So we're gonna go here, we're gonna say Redux, install. In your local machine, you will say npm install Redux. And here we will say React-Redux, which is a package that was created by the React team. Okay, when we install those two, the next thing is we need to create a store, okay? Remember that we talked about the store, which is an outside thing that manages your whole state. So we need to create that. So now we have the Redux and this installed. We need to import create store. And where we do this in our index.js, right? Not in the app.js, index.js. So this is where we kind of like say the entry point of our React application. We want to basically change it to we want to make sure Redux is managing the state from the start, right? Is someone wanted to say something? Any question? I see Ahmed. Welcome, guys. So we're gonna import this, right? This is what we're gonna do. Import create store. So this is gonna create a store for us. And at the end of the day, store is just a big object with our state, right? It's an object contains all our state. So if we have different states and different things we managing, we always need to have one place, which is our the store, right? So let me bring up my notes. Okay, so now we have that. We need to wrap our app.js with a provider. Go ahead. You want to say something, Abdulrashid?
Yeah, so you said the store is the global, right?
Yeah, that's our global state. Yep.
And do you need to keep all the component state in Redux store?
Yes. So all your state needs to go to your Redux store, right?
Okay.
So we're gonna send all our state to the store. That's what we're gonna do. So we'll do that. And to do that, we'll use reducers, and we'll learn that in a minute. But now all we're doing is just creating an empty object, right? That's all we're doing. So to do that, we need to, so we imported our create store. So now all we need to do is just say here const store is equal to, you could call it whatever you want here, create store, which we imported right here. And then that's an empty store, an empty object, basically. The next thing is we need to wrap our app.js with a provider, right? And this provider will have the store. And this is similar to context API, but this is the only place we're gonna wrap our store. Okay, so here we're gonna say, and we have to import that provider from React Redux. So we're gonna say provider, and we're gonna add something to the provider, but let's just wrap it for now. So for now, we just wrapped it. It's saying basically we need to import this. So we cannot import it from Redux because we need to create a bridge between Redux and our React. And to do that, we use the provider from React Redux. Okay. So this provider comes from React Redux. Okay, so now here is saying expected root reducer to function instead received undefined. Basically, this is saying, oh, there's nothing in your store. That's basically what it's saying. There's no object. There is nothing in your store. We're expecting something, but we didn't get anything. So now we need to pass the store to the provider. So here we're gonna say store is equal to this is an object, so store, right? So we passed it, but there's nothing in it. So now it's creating an issue for us. Every time you create a store, it's expecting a reducer. If you don't pass a reducer in here, it will say, oh, okay, there's nothing, so your application is gonna break. So we have to bring the reducer in. Remember, here we have a reducer right here. So this reducer, we could actually pass this reducer in our store, and that will probably work. So we could just say here export, and we have to move this to its own reducer place. But for now, just to show you that this is how it works, we're going to say import. We're going to say the exact name of the reducer function, which is the reducer. You could call it whatever you want. And then you have to target whatever it was, which was components, and then title, and still says undefined. Oh, we didn't pass it. You have to pass this reducer right here. Okay, so that should work. Now still things work exactly the way you expected. But now we have the store object thing. So now let's actually console log the store and see how that looks like. Looks interesting. What exactly is this store, right? We need to know. So now let's go back here. So the store is a bunch of things, right? Let me just let me go to a new browser. It's better to use the browser console log. So store is an object. As I said, this is an object. The object has a bunch of stuff. It has something called dispatch, get state. It has subscribe, all this stuff. The state. So this get state thing is how you get your state. So if you actually use that, if we say store dot get state, right? I think is it like that? Store get state and do that. It should give us the state, our state. It says undefined now. Okay, I think we have to pass something, but mainly that's how you get. But the store contains a couple of functions, right? As you can see here, it contains a couple of functions. Dispatch. Dispatch usually is how you send changes to your state. It contains a get state. It contains a replace reducer. We're not going to use that. Subscribe. This is also, we're not going to use this, but it's also used inside store. Okay, so now we know the store is a bunch of stuff, but it also has to contain our state, right? Right now, actually, we have to create other folders and stuff to see that, but it should contain somewhere our state. Dispatch is not in here. State, get state. Okay, it's not. It doesn't contain here. Okay, that's fine. We'll see later. So I'll show you later how we're gonna see that. Okay, so we have our store set up. It's working fine, but now we need to create a reducer. We need to move the reducer outside of this component. In case we want to use this reducer for another component, we cannot keep it inside a component. You could just keep it here if you want, but that is not a nice way to set it up. Okay, so let's do that. Let's actually move it away from here. Okay, so let's go to here, components, and create a not components, sorry, in a source. Let's create a folder called reducers. This is usually the setup that you will see, and then we'll create actions, and we will learn actions in a little bit. Inside reducers, let's create something called let's call it, you can name it whatever you want, title reducer.js. So this is for the title. You could break down your reducers. When I say reducers, I'm talking about like what's going to happen to your component. So the state of your component and how to change your state of your component. So we're going to copy all this to here. Copy all that there. And then now what do we need to do is we need to, we could use this. This is fine. We could work with this. But the problem now is, okay, so let's actually remove this from here. The problem now is our initial state, okay? Our initial state does not know our state doesn't have initial state. When we were here, remember use reducer was connecting initial state and reducer. But now they're disconnected. So they're not even connected right now. So we're going to use something we learned at the beginning of JavaScript, which is default arguments or default parameters. Let's put it that way. So we're going to use default parameter. We learned this in our, I think, one of our lessons in JavaScript. Basically, in JavaScript, if you say this, if you put it like this, it means that you could send something to this function and replace the state. But if you don't send anything, then the default will be this, right? So that's pretty much it. That's what it is. So this is our default state. Now our app broke because there is no, we moved our state. And also we have to kind of change around this component, move things around or remove things. We don't need anymore the use reducer. So we could just remove that. And also let's remove it from here. We don't, I mean, we kind of have to import our reducer and all that stuff. But before we do that, let's change where our reducer is. Usually what I do is I change the name to something like title reducer, right? It's exactly the same thing as the component or whatever, the reducer name. So let's save that and copy this, go to here. I usually change this to that because you're gonna have a couple of other reducers. You do not want to have like reducer and the reducer and the reducer, you know, you want to change the name around and make it relevant to whatever you're trying to accomplish. So title reducer and move this to here. This will still have a problem because our component is broken. So our component is kind of confused. It doesn't know where to get the state from. So we need to import something called connect. So basically when you want to connect a component to a reducer, you have to use something called connect, right? Which is part of the React Redux. So in here we're going to import connect from React Reducer.
So the connect is like a bridge.
It's like the bridge, yeah. This is the bridge. So this is the bridge between your component and the reducer. So when we do that, our state is still confused because we didn't even import our state. To do that, we will use the connect, right? So the connect, we have to put it right here. Instead of this, we're gonna say in here, export default, we're gonna say connect, right? This is how we connect. And then we're gonna pass two things to connect. First thing we need to pass is an object or a function, I mean, a function. For now, we're gonna put it no. And the next thing we need to pass is an object. These are the two things we need to pass. Another thing we need to do is we need to invoke the connect one more time. We need to invoke it one more time and give it the component name. This is pretty confusing because you guys did not learn this before, but it's a I forget the name of it. It's a certain function. We could actually Google it. Invoking twice a function. It has a name. I think Korean. It's called Korean JavaScript. Yeah, I think it's called Korean. Current. Yeah, JavaScript current. Let's see. So I don't want to go in depth into it because it doesn't matter. It only comes right here where we have to invoke twice. So right here, as you can see, this function is invoked 2 times. So what is current? Current is a process of transforming function that takes multiple arguments into a function that takes just single arguments and returns another function if that argument is still needed. So it's a little bit confusing, but the only thing you need to know is that you use connect, and then it needs 2 things. It needs a function and object. The object could be empty, no problem. So this object actually has to contain the reducer functions. We'll see how that works out. But this is our component, right? So we're basically saying connect whatever in here, which is most of the time is reducer to our component. Okay, so in here we're gonna pass a function in here. So we're gonna pass a, we could call let's just actually give it a name before we pass. Usually this is called the map state to props. It's a function. So you put it in here and then you declare it outside. So we're gonna declare it here. We're gonna say const map state to props. You can name it whatever you want, but this is how it's usually called because that's what it's doing. It's taking our state, which is in here. This is our state right here, initial state. And if you change anything from here, it's taking our state and it's adding it to the props of this this component. So this component, remember every component in React has props by default. I don't know why this is jumping around. It has a props by default. So now we're taking our state from the reducer and putting it in props for this component. That's a little bit confusing, I know, but all you need to know here is we're connecting the reducer to our component. That's mainly it. In this function, you need to pass state. Or we need to pass a state, which is the current state that we have, and it returns an object. Returns object. This object could be is our state, right? So we're gonna declare our state here. So we have the title. So the title would be usually state dot whatever the title is in here. State dot title, I guess, right? State dot title. So that is our state. We can actually figure this out by going to by figuring out the props here. So let's actually maybe, I don't know if this is gonna give us the props here, but let's actually console log our props here. Console log title props. So we're expecting our state to go into the props for this component. So we're gonna say props and go to here. I don't like this console log, so we're gonna go to this one. It's freaking out. Connect consume, something went wrong. Oh, props is not defined. Okay, so that's true. This is open 2 times. Okay, so props, right? So this is title props right here. We showed here. Remember that there's no other component that is passing any props to this. And we have hello people from reducer right here, our reducer. This is hello from reducer. Okay. So this should show us that it's working. I remember my teacher used to say, every time something works for him, he says, it's working, it's working. He actually used to show us a YouTube video. I don't know why. He used to say, it's working. YouTube. It's a kid that is saying like, it's working, it's working. I don't know why he used to show us this. But it was his thing. Anyway, it's working now because we actually grabbed our state from the reducer using props, using this connect thing. Connect, right? That's what connected does for us. So connect, all it does is it takes the state from the reducer and sends it to the current props for this thing. So now all we need to do now is, instead of this editing, actually we have to pass that too. We have to say here editing is state.editing, I think, and also a comma here since it's object. So now all we need to do here is we say, I think we say props, props.editing, I think, maybe, and here props.title. Let's see if that works. Yeah, that works. It's working. So we're good. Now, the only thing that's not working is the dispatch, because we have to send the dispatch and all that stuff. But it's working now. We send a state from the reducer to the title. The dispatch is not working, so we will do that dispatch. We also, I think we should keep it to this, the title, and then show you the actions and all that. I wanted to create something else, but I think we should keep it simple. Okay, so now let's do, if we want to do the dispatch, we have to create actions, right? Because remember, we said if you want to do anything with the dispatch, you have to create an action and boom, send it to the dispatch, and the dispatch sends it to the reducer. Reducer does something to it, and then boom, sends it out to the UI. So that is that's our process. So before we do that, any question? Su'ala.
What is that function? What is the point of this function? The map.
Map state to props.
Yeah.
So the point of this function is it's part of the connect, right? So you could actually take all this. Let's take this object. We could put it inside here, inside right here, right? So all this goes in here. I mean, this whole function. So you could just create a function here and give it it's usually an empty, I mean, you could call it whatever you want. So you could say map state to props and give it a state here. And then after that, you could return this, that's it. So return that, and that should work exactly the same, right? So that works exactly the same thing. So this is a function that belongs to connect, which is from React Redux. So this is how usually connect works, right? We're basically asking connect to grab our state from the reducer and send it to the props right here. And you guys learned the props, right? So props are basically part of every component. If you put props here, then that means if you have any props, then it will show within your component. So that's what connect is doing. So it's connecting between the component and the state from the reducer. So let me write something here. So this would be connect. Connect connects reducer state from the reducer to the current components props, right? it maps, sorry, it maps your state to the current components props. So this is what it shows here. It's mapping. It's basically sending prop. Another way to know actually is, let me show you another way. If we go to here and go to, I'm not sure if you guys have this. I think maybe you have to install or something. We have, I'll talk about the Redux part, but we have components here. So this is a little thing that helps you with visualize your React or your React component or React application. Basically, it shows the components. So now we have a app.js component, we have the title component, and then we have within the title component, you have something else in here. Usually this is contains whatever. So this is actually your this is sending from app.js. So it's right here, app.js. We're basically connecting app.js to the title, and the title component has a couple of things. So it has props, it has hooks, whatever, and then state. If you have any state, it will show here. So now, as you can see here, we have props, we have editing, and we have title. Let's say we pass a props from app.js. So we say here, a fake prop, and then we say, okay, this is a fake prop, right? Boom. And now if we go back to here, as you can see, it's a fake prop, fake props, fake prop. So any props that you send to this title will go into here. So the good thing now is, we can send state from the reducer and send it to any component using connect. Easy, right? So that's the whole thing about the reduce about the Redux, is that any component can get the state by using connect, and then all your state is managed by the store, right? Is managed by store, and the store expects the reducer to do something, its work, and then actions do something else. But at the end of the day, how do you get your state is by using connect. Any other question? Su'ala? Okay, we'll take a break. That's a lot to digest. So to go take a break, get water, get coffee, shah, whatever. And then we will get into actions and dispatches and how to do all that stuff. How to make this change, because when we click this, it gives us error because dispatch is not working. So see you guys in 10 minutes. Okay, let's get back to it. All right. Okay, so last time we were talking about we showed basically our state. We displayed the state, but now the problem is the dispatch is not working. So for the dispatch to work, we need to we have two dispatches here. We have toggle editing and we have edit title. So we need two things for us to work for this to work. To do that, we need to work with actions. So actions have two things. Let's create a file and let's call it title actions, as you could imagine, JS. So in here, we're going to create two things. So we're going to create two things. One would be action types. Action types are basically a string. It's a string that basically tells us what to do. Basically, it's like a title. So action types would be this. This is an action type. Toggle editing, our title, edit title. Those are two actions, action types. So let's do that. Let's create those two first, and we have to export those two too. The reason why we export in action types is because we want to use them in reducer here. So let's say export const. So to start with, we're just gonna make it a variable, right? So we're gonna say something like edit title, and this is how you usually write action types, is by making them capital. That's how you know these are action types. You don't have to make them capital, but if you go to any application that uses Redux, you see that action types are always capital. And we're just gonna say here edit edit title. Remember that in here we're using a string, right? Like you see, but all we did here is we converted the string to a variable. Now every time you call this variable, you basically referring to this string. That's all we did. Let's create another one. Export const. Let's call this one toggle, like exactly the way it was. Toggle editing. I think that's what it's called. Toggle editing, or yeah, toggle editing. It has to be exact the same as before, because you will see it in the reducer. So and this would be toggle editing. Okay, so now we have the action types. The next step is we have to create action creators. Action creators. So what are action creators? Action creators are basically a function that returns an object. That's all it is. It returns an object that contains instructions. It's a function that returns an object which contains instructions. Okay, so we'll see how we do that. So let's create action creators. We need to do two action creators, one for the editing, one for the toggling. So, and also we have to export those two. So export const, and this would be an arrow function. So let's call this one edit title, right? So edit title, and this would be a function. Remember that when we're trying to edit a title, right? When we're trying to edit title, we have to send a payload here, right? So every time you see a payload in action creators, you have to pass a parameter here. So we're gonna pass the title, whatever the title we're changing from here. So we're gonna do that. So this is the function, and all it does is it returns an object. So this is the object it returns, and this object is instruction of what is going to happen. And this is basically two things. One is a type, you need a type, and also you need a payload. So those are the only two things you need in here. So let's see. So we're going to say type here, and the type would be this. This is the type. Remember, these are action types. So our type is for this one is edit title. And remember to use the variable, not the string here. So we always gonna use the variable instead of the string because we already set the string. And also this is spelled not right. It doesn't matter how you spell the string actually here. The main thing is if you spell the variable, you have to spell exactly everywhere. Another thing is we need a payload. So every time you pass something here, we need a payload. So payload would be title, right? And that's it. This is the action creator. All it does is returns this thing. Now what we could do is we could actually work with this part, but we also need to pass this one for it to work. So let's just do that too. So let's do another export const. Let's call this one toggle edit. It's always good to have everything in similar names so you know which one matches with this. When we're toggling something in here, we're not passing any payload, right? So we don't need to worry about payload. So if you don't have any payload, then all you need to do is just an empty, you don't need to pass any parameters, right? So, and then what we do, return an object. The object usually has type, it has to have a type, but the payload is optional. So the type this one is, who can tell me what the type for this one is? What do we write here?
Toggle edit.
Toggle edit. So it's this type right here. So you have to use your types here exactly the way they are. Toggle edit. And that's it. So this is an action creator. This is an action creator. And when I say action creator, I mean, if we go back to our original drawing, right here is the action. And the action creators are basically a function that basically runs every time we click, like we say click here, and then it runs, and then it sends a dispatch. All right. So now our action creators are done. Our action types are done. The next thing we need to do now is send all this to the reducer so it can do something with it. So let's go to our reducer. So the reducer expects, right now here we have a string. It doesn't know what this string is. Like it doesn't know where this string is coming from. There's no dispatch here that's sending that string. There's nothing. So the action is confused. It's saying, okay, I don't know what this string is, and there's no dispatch. So now we need to convert this string to a variable that we're gonna grab from action here. So we're gonna say import. We're gonna import two things. Import edit exactly the way it is. We're gonna import the action types, edit title, and also toggle editing from our action place. Okay, so an action and then title actions. So now we're gonna change this to these variables. That's all we're gonna do. Boom, and then change this one to this. No, I think it's the other way around. So this to this, now cut it, copy it, and then the toggle goes to this. Remember that the toggle does not have any payload, right? All we do now is kind of like switching it back and forth. So there is no payload. That's why there's nothing here. There's no payload. But for the title, we need to give it whatever we're gonna write here. We need to give it the payload, and that's how that's why we have here title action.payload. So now everything is put together. Everything is good. The next step is we need to tell our component, right? We need to tell our component how to work with the actions that we created, right? So to do that, we need to import our actions. I mean, action creators, not the action types in here. So we're going to say import. Remember that in reducer, we imported action types, not the action creators. in here, we're going to import the action creators. So the first one would be edit title, I think. So double check if you're not sure, edit title, go back here, edit title. The second one would be toggle, toggle edit. So we're going to import our action creators from whatever it is, actions, and then title actions. Okay, so we did that. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to pass these actions to our connect. So how do we connect the actions to our component? Is by passing it to the next thing, the next object. We need to pass our, this is basically our actions. This is designed for our reducer. This is designed for our actions. So that's how they're connected. So let's do that. Let's pass our these in there, these two. Actually, we just kind of copy both of them and just pass them here. And that's pretty much it. Now, what it did was it sent these two actions to our props. So remember, we were doing props thing. Now, if we go to, if we refresh here, so remember our props, right? We have edit title, which is a function, and we have toggle edit, which is another function, right? So now all we need now is, instead of the dispatch, all this stuff, we just need to pass those functions. So in here, instead of dispatch and all this, let's change all that. We're gonna pass it, and also we don't need this too. Let's pass, let's grab it from props. So we're gonna say props dot, this was supposed to be edit title. So we're gonna say, we're gonna grab that. So which is right here, edit title. Just right here, edit title. And it's a function, so we have to invoke it like that, right? We invoke that function. Now that should make it work. So that will work 100%. Another one is also this one, dispatch. We don't need all this dispatch stuff, right? We can get rid of all that dispatch stuff. We always say is props that, what was it? Edit title, toggle. No. Okay. So this one is the toggle one because we only click in that. So this would be toggle, and then edit title would be the bottom one. Okay. So that's it. And remember, we need to pass something here. So every time we say edit title, if you go back to the action creator, edit title, it's expecting something, right? It's expecting a string or whatever, something. So now we have to pass that here, and that would be what we had before, which was our input. Whatever we input in this input, we're gonna pass it here, right? And that should make it work. That should be good, right? So now if we edit and update it, it should work. Yes, it's working. Alhamdulillah, so that's good. So that is how you work with the dispatch, is by going here, creating your action types, creating your action creators, and then sending that to your reducer. Remember that your reducer needs to know about your actions. So every time you send an action, so every time we click this button, it's an action. So we send the action right now, and that action goes to, the first step it does is it goes to our the action type, and it says, okay, where is the action creator? And then it grabs the action creator, which is this one. I mean, it was this one, the toggle edit. And then it says, okay, good. Now let's send this to our reducer. So it goes to the reducer and says, okay, I have a toggle for you. And then the reducer says, okay, thank you, the toggle, I get it. So action.type is equal to toggle editing. And this switch statement goes through your whole thing and finds something called toggle editing. And here it finds this case. And it says, okay, let's return a copy of our state. This is a shallow copy. So we copied the state. And then let's do let's switch the editing from false to true, and that's how you have this editing. This box is when you switch from true to false, false to true, I mean, and that's what it does. It just switches it around. And then what it does is when we click this button update, then another action is sent. So we click this update button, another action is sent to the edit title action creator. So this will be it. And then this function says, oh, thank you for calling me, but I need something. I have a parameter. I need something. Give me something. And then you give it something. I mean, we could just put it something here like a string, like let's say a test. And now if we click update, it should just show a test right there. So it's basically asking for something here. Whatever it's asking, we give it, all right? And then we say, okay, and then it says, thank you for giving me whatever I asked you for. Now I'm gonna set the payload for our action to whatever you gave me. So it's gonna set that to this, and then it's gonna say, okay, I have the type and I have the payload. I'm gonna send it to the reducer. Reducer says, okay, it says, thank you for sending me edit title, which is an action type here. And then it looks for something called edit title, and it finds here this case, and it says, okay, I'm gonna return this object, which is, let's copy the state first. Remember that reducers always copy the state when they want to do any change. Copy the state. Let's grab the payload, whatever the payload is. So the payload was the title. Where did the title come from? It came from here. We passed it through here, which is anything that we type in here. And then the title, we set the title to the payload that we have, and then we set the editing to false, which is we hide this input basically. Okay, and then we had the input, and now this whole thing goes to our it goes back to here. And before it does that, actually it goes to our store and it updates the store. Then the store says, okay, I see that you updated your state. Now I'm going to update the UI, which is the component. And then the UI changes, which is here. Any question? I know that's a lot. Any question?
Ma'al, for the final touch, you don't use dispatch, right?
I did not use dispatch. Dispatch is used. So here's the thing about dispatch. Connect before I think a year or 2 years ago, you have to declare dispatch here. You have to say const. You say here you say map dispatch to props, right? You say match dispatch to props, which you could actually do now too if you want. We match in dispatch all the dispatch actions to our props, and then you create a function here which will have the state to start with, and we'll have an action probably, and then after that you put your actions here. So all your actions, just edit toggle, all this stuff in here. But now all you need to do is, you don't need to do all that. All you need to do is pass your action creators here, and then boom, then they go to your props right here. They go inside your props, and all you need to do is just use them. You don't need to use dispatch anymore. It's in the background basically. Any other question? And I can show you the map dispatch to props. Okay, so match dispatch to props. We'll go here. As you can see here, let's go down. Yeah, map dispatch to props, and then you pass dispatch, and now you have to do all the dispatch actions here. See, as you can see here, this is doing inline basically, but we don't have to do all this anymore. All you have to do is just pass your pass your action creators in here, the second object, the second thing in the connect, which is this object, and then it goes to your prop, and then you just use it. That's it. You just call it, and that's it. Any other question? I think somebody else had some question, maybe. Okay. I actually had another example, but for the sake of time, I don't think we could go to that example. Yeah. Let me know if you don't understand any part of what we did.
Everything is it connected to the title JS now?
This title JS, yeah. So the reducer and the actions are all connected through the connect here. So the reducer, all it does is it kind of manipulates the state, right? So every time it manipulates the state, we use connect to make sure that we keep track of the changes. So anytime we change the title, the reducer changes the title, we get the same copy, exact change in here through connect. So it's connected, and then we send our reducer, which is this title reducer, to the store, which is a big object, basically, that shows our. So if we actually console log right now, it might show our state. I'm not sure. Store. Save it. Go here. So search dispatch. Get state. Scopes. It should show somewhere. I think they changed it a little bit, maybe, but usually you see it state somewhere here. Dispatch actions. So as you can see, there's length 1. There's some dispatch going on, but you have your state within your component right here. So that's all you need to know, is just basically you're grabbing the state from the reducer using connect, and then you have to do the other setups, which is set up the store and send all your reducers to the store, like right here. And maybe sometimes you will have multiple reducers, and we will actually learn something else called the middleware later on in the next lesson. But if you have multiple reducers, you use something else called connect reducers or combined reducers in here. So you will import something called combine reducers, and then that's how you combine multiple reducers and send it to your store, right? But we'll learn that next time. Any question? Okay, so let's go to our assignment. Let's look at the assignment right here. Your assignment is to take this carousel application and change it to and use Redux to manage the state. So move all your state to Redux. That's pretty much all you have to do. Now it has here, you have to read all the components you have. You have to understand how the app is set up. But you have your state here, like right here. And you do not want that. So you want to move all this state to the reducer function. Maybe break it down. So you could break down your state to smaller components and then create multiple reducers and then set that up that way. And then you don't have to do all these props and all this. So every component will receive its own reducers using connect. So like header has information about the car. So now you will bring in the connect and then bring your state from the reducer and use it that way. And also there is a action you have to do. So I think somewhere in here, where is it? Add feature. Yeah, you have to create this. So add an on-click function that adds or removes a feature from a new car. I can probably show you how this looks like. I'm not sure. Let me check it in my other screen. It's not set up for me, but let me just set it up quickly. Let me run it. Let's say I already set it up, so I'm just gonna run it. NPM start. I was working on it, doing some changes to it, but let me remove those changes so I can show you how the application looks like right now. Okay, remove that, remove all this, save it. Hopefully that works. Okay, something's wrong with the connection. Did my app stop? Sorry, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, now we can.
Okay, sorry about that. I was somehow my internet connection went away. So this is how the application looks like. The homework assignment is a app of car sale. Then you add these features to this car. So when you click add here, it will increase this price. So when you click add, it will increase the price. So this feature of adding is not still set up. So you have to add that too. And then manage everything within Redux. So that is your assignment. And read the instructions here. It will help you a lot. So these instructions planning is important. Understanding the application, make sure you understand all the components and what they do. And then after that, do your action, which is set up the store. So here it says set up an empty reducer and initial state. So that, you could start with the reducer, set up a store and provider. We did that. Connect component. So then you connect your reducer to the component. Add events and actions, handle UI. So this will be just a click button, working with the click button and the click function. Then you build action creators and action types, of course, and then write the reducer logic for the action. And then after that, that's it. Then if you have other reducers, or other actions or reducers, then you do the same thing again. You only have to set up the provider and the store one time. You don't have to set up multiple times. So your MVP is move the given state to the reducer and initial state for the Redux store. So the state we have here, right here, move it to a reducer. So that'll be your first step for the MVP. Next step would be to set up a Redux flow. User should be able to add features to their car, which I just showed you. User should be able to remove added feature from their car. Total should update as user adds or removes feature from their car. So this is your MVP. Any question? Any?
Can you explain a little bit where it says write the reducer logic for actions? What does that mean?
Okay, write the reducer logic for actions. That one is, if we go back to our here, is write the reducer. It says write the reducer logic for actions. So if we go back to our assignment, this is the reducer logic, right? So this is reducer logic. So a switch statement, when you're doing the switch statement, is expecting an action type. So action types always come from the action. Here you have to create the action types. So that's what it means. So, and then the logic is basically this return, whatever is going to happen here. So when you're doing adding a car, you have to copy the state and then update the state for adding the car here. And then when you're removing, you have to also do another action type and then do the logic for that of removing it. So you could do that too. So that's what it means, writing the logic for writing the reducer logic for the action types. That's what it means. Or actions. You can say actions. When I say actions, I'm talking about the action creators and also the action types. You can never have a. You could have only action types sometimes, but you can never have no action types and then action creators. Action creators always need action types, but the action types don't need action creators, right? And you will see other applications in the future that are complex applications. They have a whole file for all the action types. So they put all the action types in one place. And if they need action types, they import and all that stuff. But now we're going to keep it simple and put everything in one place. So yeah. Any other question? All right, guys, try your best. Tomorrow is Friday, so work on your assignment tomorrow, and then you have tomorrow on the weekend. Monday, inshallah, we're gonna move on to the next lesson. So try to finish everything as much as you can. We're finishing this whole thing as soon as we can because we wanna move on from the front end. We're almost done with the front end. So now the only thing that's left is async Redux, which is a little bit more advanced Redux, maybe adding a few other things to Redux to solidify basically your knowledge of Redux. And then we're going to do the sprint project, and then we're going to move on to the build week. And that would be interesting one. So build week. So when you're done with the build week, inshallah, we're going to move on to the backend. So we're almost done. We're almost more than halfway of the whole thing. So if we move a little bit faster, inshallah, we're going to finish sooner. But I want you guys to, inshallah, be present and try to be more communicative. You know, let me know if something is going on in your life. I want to be. I want to make sure that I understand what you're going through, so that I don't think like you're just sitting around and not doing anything. I want to make sure that, you know, you guys. I know some of you are not feeling well. That's fine. So as long as you communicate with me, inshallah, I can adjust the assignment and things like that and work with you, inshallah. So things are getting heated up right now with the state management and the Redux, inshallah. But you're not going to be able to do the build week if you don't understand all this Redux and all this stuff. So make sure, inshallah, to kind of finish it in a big way so that we can move on to the next section, inshallah. So khaira dirjana, inshallah. And I will share the notes. Yeah, I'll share all the notes. Let me share that now. Okay. Any question before I close out?
My.
All right. Okay. I'll share the video and the notes, inshallah. Khairan li rijana. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.